Hey everybody, this is Chris from Skeleton. Just recording another video here that's going to walk you through a few more updates as part of Skeleton Next, or Skeleton V3 as you may know it, the next major iteration of Skeleton. So I've just finished recording another video that should be available by the time you see this, covering some of the new details for the new documentation site. This is part of an ongoing sort of series as we, release new videos every couple weeks, every few weeks, just showing you where we are in the process. So if you're not familiar, you can come to our repository here, Skeleton Repository, click the discussion section, and then we are keeping these updated posts kind of pinned here at the top. So update 1 was the previous update covering code and design changes that we're kind of making with components and the visual aesthetic. Uh, Today's updates will cover one, the Astrodocs, which is covered in the previous video. Definitely go check that out. That should be live today as well. And then this video, which is going to focus more on the Tailwind plugin, which is really the biggest update over the last couple weeks. So the it's probably one of the most important changes as well because it helps inform a lot of the process for what comes next with Skeleton. This is everything from primitives like button styles to card styles, our color system, our typography system. So a lot of those things that are just very foundational, very, very base level for being able to build up and build things like components and, go much further with the process of using Skeleton as creating your design system and your applications going forwards. So very important portion of the updates, and it again will sort of influence everything that comes next. So right now I just want to kind of cover some of the specifics of what we've changed. And so the very first thing I want to cover is actually not on the page here on the docs. It's going to be the new theme format. So themes previously were pretty limited. They primarily handled a handful of typography settings, a couple, border styles and sizes, and then things like the actual color palette. In previous versions of Skeleton, the palette was a little bit more limited. It would extend from shade 50 to shade 900. So 950 is brand new as part of more current versions of Tailwind. We're just following their lead, bringing that in, and it adds a nice kind of balance. Then the other thing is the addition of all of these contrasting tones. So you can see now we have a contrasting tone all the way, and it differs for each shade. So the breakpoint for where that switches from the dark tone to the lighter tone, it varies. I'm not going to say everything that's shown here on the screen is exactly perfect. Most of this is just manual and me eyeing it and taking my best guess, but that's where the new theme generator will come in. Will help kind of programmatically determine some of those values for you. But in the meantime, I wanted to show you what the new theme format looked like because, as you can kind of see from the preview, there's quite a bit more to it. So don't let that be intimidating or daunting to you. As I just mentioned, we're going to be updating the theme generator, which is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for this for you. But I did want to highlight and showcase some of the cool new changes that are coming. So you're going to see there's different sections right here as this kind of work in progress theme is kind of being defined for spacing, typography. We've got backgrounds, borders, colors, lots and lots and lots of color settings. So quite a bit going on in here. The first one I want to start with is spacing because this is brand new. This is a V3 specific feature. So if you are not familiar with spacing, Tailwind provides a whole system around this for you. If you go look at their docs, they have this, customized spacing section here under customization, spacing, and they talk through a lot of the details here. And they even showcase this kind of visual example of what this is and what this looks like. I think somewhere on the page they cover, right here, all of the properties that utilize the spacing. So when you are defining a padding, a margin, a width, height, etc., gap sizing for things like grids or flexbox, these are using your Tailwind defaults for what those sizes actually represent. So when you do P4 for padding 4, what does that size actually translate to? And so there's some kind of a value behind the scenes that's actually being used, right? And so by default, if you're using 4, that's 1 rem, rem, I don't know how to pronounce it. which translates to 16 pixels. And so you get something that's like this. If you go to 8, it's going to be double that and twice as wide or twice as spaced out. And on and on and on. Lots and lots and lots of canned options for this. Tailwind also lets you both override these and also extend them. If you want values greater than 96 down here at the very end, if you want to go even further, you can certainly do that through your Tailwind config. There's ways that you can do that. So one of the things that we're very interested with this with Skeleton is the fact that this exists, but there's no sort of concept of a scaling factor. If you want to update these values, you quite literally have to go in and change each one individually. And so when there's, let's call it a few dozen options there, that's quite a lot to do by hand and a lot of adjustment for your side. So what we really wanted to do was lean into the approach that's already provided, but add a little flavor to it, add a little extra. And so in V3, what we're adding is a scaling factor. And so what this does is if you look through the sizing here, we're replicating all of the exact same values that Tailwind provides from 0.5 all the way to 96. We're using the actual same value. So if we go look at 4, we can see that's using one rem is how I'm going to pronounce it, which translates to 16 pixels. And then we're just doing a little multiplication here to add a little scale factor. And so that small little change has a big impact on how your site can actually display based on the theme settings. And so to help visualize this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how this looks. And so kind of take note of the spacing in the header between elements, even visualized here, and how this last value in the list kind of goes over to kind of even with this little astro toolbar here at the bottom of the page. And so I'm going to adjust that, and I'm going to go, let's kind of crunch everything down to a small size. So I'm going to do 0.75, which would be like 75% of what the base value was. I'm going to save that. It's going to take just a second to update. And then you can see everything's kind of crunched. This is a little tighter. Everything's kind of squeezed in a little bit. And then likewise, if I go the other direction, and if I change this to 1.25, so 125%, you can see the opposite. Then everything's really kind of spaced out. It's even more pronounced in elements like your buttons. So if we do what we have now, and then if we go way, way down to something really small, like 50%, you're going to see it's really kind of cramming that stuff, together, really, really making that tight, that spacing very tight. And so the cool thing is you're noticing like all of this is happening with only one change, which is the change to the scale factor. And so right now we're building out all of these styles into the theme. We may ingest those and move those over into the plugin itself. But so this was probably the only value you as a theme creator will have to deal with. But it provides quite a lot of control, and you can kind of start to imagine how variable or how much different one theme could look to another, because it's not just a color palette swap like it was in V2. Scaling, grid sizes, all of these different spacing sizes, these will be customizable per theme. So immediately a really cool feature there. The next thing we have is the typography system. So very similar to what we have with the spacing system, we're doing a very, very similar scaling system with this. And so this is a little bit more of a kind of known design kind of system, if you will, or kind of a pattern that people use for design systems, which is to use a typographic scale. If you're not familiar, there's a brilliant article here, which I'll link in the written version of this update, that covers all this information and just kind of talks about sort of the math and science of how folks kind of determine the sizing for different things like headings. So typically there's a base size defined, and then you use some sort of a scaling factor kind of described here. And so similar to what we were doing, this is a little, almost 150%, and it kind of scales up and down. But these sort of canned amounts for doing these different scaling sizes. And so again, math, science, kind of out there, hard to understand. So let's just change something and see what it looks like. So by default, we're using what's called a minor second, which is this value that's presented on the screen. I'm going to go to something a little bit more extreme. So I'm going to apply this, I'm going to save this, and then we're going to watch as it updates Boom. Now we have this very, very large, chunky size, group of headings, and everything is scaled and based off of that. And so again, you can do lots and lots of really cool stuff with this. If we do, and I'm sorry, it keeps losing my place on the VS Code there. That's really annoying. We could do something really extreme and something custom and get real small, and we get all these, tiny, tiny headings. So even some of like our code snippets and stuff like that are based on the typographic scale here. So really, really cool, really powerful stuff that you get with, again, one single value that's being updated. For now, I'm going to go back to our kind of default. I like this kind of like minimal scaling size. It looks really nice. It's very, visually appealing. The other thing you're going to notice is I'm going to quit jumping back and forth so it quits doing the weird scroll thing. But we're offering much, much more options for defining the base styles for your fonts. So everything from the default font color, the dark variation of that. So when you're in dark mode, what font families you're using, what font size you're using, height, on and on and on and on. And so right now we're kind of inheriting or just sort of using the defaults that Tailwind provides, but you can see the power of coming in here and being able to manually define all of those values. If you're really, really into typography, or if you have a designer that's designing, the styling for your application, this is going to be very valuable, very helpful for just defining those and making sure that matches exactly what you're looking for. And we may grow these settings over time as well, but at least we wanted to get a few kind of canned options in. We're also doing the same thing, but for headings. So if you want the headings to have a different, different font, a different font color by default, something like that, we have a way for us to, way for you to define that right in your theme and go and control, the font colors and things like that. For now, again, we're just inheriting from whatever, Tailwind provides as the default, just to let it kind of cook. It's fine. We're even inheriting from like the base font size from right up above. So you can see it just sort of waterfalls down that process. We even do things like anchors. So you can see we're setting the anchor color here to the primary tone, which is why anytime you see an anchor class applied to one of our anchor elements, the styling for that is being defined here. And you can even see like when it's active or focused or hovered, it's using the underline style, which is all defined straight from that theme. So again, very cool, very powerful, lots and lots of control there. We're also moving some things that were previously just hard-coded into Skeleton, such as your default app body background color for light and dark mode. Previously, those were just, again, part of the base styles that Skeleton applied for you. Those are now controlled through your theme. So if you really want to have wildly different colors between light and dark mode, if you want to break outside of your current, color system, you can certainly do that and change a lot of different things. We're also doing borders, which covers everything from rounded styles to borders to divides, outlines, and rings. So quite a lot of options there, several different settings. Very similar to what we had. I think we called it base and container for rounded styles previously. So this is like your button style. So if I do like a huge number here and we go and we take a look at buttons here, they've got a little bit of kind of squared but kind of rounded off. And then super annoying the VS Code keeps doing that. Save that. We're going to see, boom, all our buttons go to rounded. So very quick and easy way to be able to adjust those. I'm going to keep the style I've got because I kind of like the aesthetic we're working with, the current theme. And then some inheritance here for just making sure, like, what is the default border for things like your forms. So if you want to have no border, you can certainly do that. If you want to have big chunky borders, you can set that. And then everything kind of just tries to stay in line with that. Although you can override those if you certainly choose. As far as colors, so there's a lot of cool options here with colors. I was talking through the contrast of the different tones here. So by default, we have almost exactly the exact same palette as in the previous version. This is using RGB colors, which is what Tailwind prefers when it comes to colors configured in your extended colors and things like that. The reason it does RGB is so that it can have the alpha layer for transparency. So if you did something like primary 50, you can have that as your or 500 as your main tone, and then you do something like that would be 50% opacity. So That's just features that are built into Tailwind and possible when you break it into the 3-channel approach. But you're going to see a whole slew of new additions here, which are what is the light contrasting tone and what is the dark contrasting tone, these two values here. And then we actually inherit those for all of the contrasting tones for each shade. So you can even see like dark, 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 dark. And then when we hit 500, we switch to light, and then everything goes like that. And if we come over here and compare, sure enough, there it goes. It goes dark, 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 all the way to 400, and then switches to light and stays to light all the way to the end. And we do that same approach for every color. So success, warning, error, surface, etc. So quite a lot of values, and it does kind of pad out the size of the theme a little bit, but that does give you an incredible depth of control over how and where that kind of contrasting tone switches. We would love to be able to just save like a single value and say, hey, if it's below 400 or above 50, then it should switch. Unfortunately, there's no real way to define that in Tailwind, or excuse me, in CSS itself. So we do have to be very explicit and kind of write all that out. So just wanted to bring your attention to all of that. Okay, so that's themes. Lots and lots of new settings, lots of new features in there. It's definitely some cool stuff. And again, remember the theme generator is coming to provide a very friendly UI for configuring and adjusting all of that. So imagine that's going to be things like color pickers and range sliders and buttons that you click, rather than having to deal with the raw values under the hood like this, unless you just are a power user and you really want to. So the next thing I want to show you is more features of the Skeleton Tailwind plugin itself. And so if we look, obviously there's quite a lot. Basically everything from here down to here is controlled by the plugin. And so that's all of the color system, all of the typography stuff. We're taking all of these values defined in your theme and essentially ingesting those and providing those into your application when you use our plugin. So one of the very first things I want to show you is the core, which is this really cool feature here. This is where we're essentially creating our Tailwind plugin itself. The feature that, so when you import the Skeleton plugin into your Tailwind config, this is the file that's defining how all of that is being kind of put together. And you can see we're doing things like creating a plugin, we're adding utilities, we're doing some generated stuff here, which I'll talk about in just a second. And then we're kind of importing all of these smaller modules, which control things like color pairings, typography, some of the preset stuff we talked about in the previous video, spacing, which we were just talking about. All of those are in little smaller modules that all get kind of put together and wired up in this one location. So if you're curious where all that happens, please do check this out. This is all open source on our next branch on the GitHub repo if you're curious. The two things I want to show is that we do handle styling and how Tailwind essentially creates the things that you're seeing on the screen in two different ways. The sort of default in the way that Tailwind prefers a lot of this is for things to be written in a CSS and JavaScript format, which means that you are writing JavaScript that represents, class names and then the values that are actually being applied for that particular class. And doing it in a Java, again, a JavaScript-based format. So arrays, objects, etc., to kind of write that out. The other approach is that we have certain places where we actually write proper CSS. We're using @apply, but we could easily write this with vanilla CSS if we really wanted to. But you can see there's two different approaches here. So if you see me switching between .css files and .ts or TypeScript files, and you're kind of curious what the divide is there, that's what we're doing. And so what Skeleton is doing behind the scenes for our plugin is we're actually taking these CSS files. We've wrote some scripts and things like that will compile those to the CSS and JavaScript format. And so it's taking what we're authoring in CSS and converting for us. The reason we're doing that is partially legacy. Like a lot of the stuff was originally written completely in CSS, and then we've slowly kind of imported things over to the format that Tailwind prefers, which is the JavaScript format. Unfortunately, I think the authoring experience is much poorer in that regard. So as much as possible, we are trying to keep this. And then very interesting enough, just a kind of small side or tidbit here, Tailwind I think understands this is a little bit difficult and is moving towards an approach in future versions of their Oxide compiler, I think is what the term is, or the name, where they're going to let you author more of your settings and config and plugin settings and things like that in CSS. So we're in this weird divide where we're pushing everything to JavaScript, but eventually we may revert it back to CSS. So that's fun. But, just that aside, just if you have some high level understanding of why there's two different formats of files that I'm showing you. But the first one I wanted to show you is our core styles, which if you've ever had a chance to look at our core styles in Skeleton V2, I can pull those up real quick so you can see that. That covered everything from your base background, color for your body, selection colors. If you're on mobile and you tap something, you'll see a little color there. That's the mobile focus, scroll bar styles, dividers. It was pretty extensive. It even controlled some things that weren't listed on this page here, such as some of the default styling for forms and some typography stuff and things that we weren't really happy with, having so much control over. We wanted to leave a little bit of that to more put it more in your hands or leave it at default settings as much as possible. So you are seeing some basic stuff that we are defining here, such as we are pulling in some of those, like that body background color that we defined in our theme a moment ago. This is where that's being applied. That's being applied to your body. The base typography styles, those are all being applied right here in your base style, which just means that these base styles are just on by default. When you install our plugin, these are the styles that are just going to immediately be applied to your application in a global scope. So selection, the tab highlight color we were just talking about, some scroll bar settings, things like that. There were a few other things in V2 that were included in here that are now just completely removed. And we've just essentially moved those to opt-in styles. So things like inputs, like I was just talking about a moment ago, those styles will only come when you use the .input class or some kind of equivalent for any of your form elements. So we are lightening up a little bit on the base styles, which is really cool. There's been some discussion around opt-in styling for scroll bars. And so we are looking at a couple options to make this where these are an opt-in, a setting you either enable or opt out, or it's a setting you disable if you do not want to use our styled scroll bar styles, because I know that's a very opinionated thing and people have different ideas about what they want those to look like. Okay. So do know that's on our radar, something we're looking at. The next thing I want to show you is components. So, this is the plugin itself. I've kind of skimmed over this, but this is the plugin. It's now, we were just looking at base. We're going to look at components, badges, buttons. That's what these components are, right? These features that you've seen under the Tailwind section on our docs here. So badges, buttons, cards, etc. When I say components, those are referring to very specifically what Tailwind refers to, Tailwind components, which are a set of utility classes that are created using a combination of vanilla CSS or Tailwind primitives, or however you want to think of that. And so you're going to see how we're creating the styles for the badge and the badge icon style, how we're creating the styles for buttons, the different size buttons, on and on. These are what your components are. And so there's quite a few of these. I'm not going to go through every one, but I just want to give you a high level of what those are and the context of where those are included. The next section I want to show you is the extends or extend section. So instead of introducing brand new styles and utility classes with components, what we're doing with extends is we're actually extending the colors that are provided, or styles that are provided built into Tailwind itself. So if we come and we look at Tailwind and we look at colors, we have all of these default colors built into Tailwind, but those are obviously not your theme colors, right? So what we need to do is extend or expand this palette to include those unique values that are unique to Skeleton and unique to your theme. And so we do that using this kind of colors extend script that does exactly that. It goes in here and it takes all of the colors from your theme, so your contrasting tones, your base colors, things like that, and it wires those up and it adds those in such a way that it just kind of grows and extends that list that's available in Tailwind. So we do this for colors, which is the way we handled it in V2. So we've cleaned up a little the script and obviously added the contrast tone, which is brand new in V3, but for the most part, very similar to what we had previously. We're also expanding our borders. So this is actually overriding some of the default values, which is kind of a cool concept. So what this is going to do for you is if you go and you look at something like, what's a good example? Probably the inputs and forms. The fonts, the style that's being used for this border here, that's being derived from your theme. So if I open the themes, we're just calling it next for now. I don't know what the actual name of this is going to be. And if I look for border, if I spell it right, you can see we have a default border of 1px, but I'm going to do something just extreme. I'm going to do 5, and we're going to save that. And we're going to come here and look and see all the different places that rings or borders or outlines are being used and where that value is derived from. It's coming straight from your theme, right? So what we're doing here is when we actually define that, I'm going to come here and open forms. Yeah. You can see we have something like, actually I'll show you over here. I'll show you in, sorry, this is very discombobulated. Yeah, we have input styles. Yeah. So if we look at border, a ring, yeah. Okay, so this is where we're defining your actual, outline, a ring or border or whatever you want for your inputs. You can see what we're doing is we're not doing something like ring-token like we were doing previously, where we were saying, hey, we're using a design token based class from Skeleton, make sure to set that default. What we're doing is we're just overriding the default. And the reason we're doing that is because it doesn't prevent you from doing things like saying, hey, I want it to be 1px, or if I want it to be the candle option for 2 or 4 or 10 or whatever options provided. We're just overriding the default, which is the one you're going to use probably 99% of the time. So most of the time we don't want to have to make you write extra styles. We just want you to be able to lean into the Tailwind defaults. And so what we're doing with the border extend is we're just overriding the border width default, or the divider width default, and outline default, ring default, and just providing those settings with the value defined in your theme, which is a really cool way to do it because it allows you to continue to just use the patterns and paradigms that you know from Tailwind and just immediately get the benefits of your design system implemented in Skeleton v3. So some really, really cool stuff there. I'm going to revert those couple changes here just so that we don't have these big, thick, outlines and things like that. But just if you're curious what the example or use case is for the extend, we're doing it for that. The spacing system we were just talking about a moment ago at the beginning of this video, that's where all of this is ingested. And again, we're just overriding the values within Tailwind with the values provided in your theme. Simple enough. So not replacing, not preventing you from able to extend that further or even override those if you want to go in a different direction just for a one-off value or something like that. We're just very, very specifically adjusting that and just overriding the defaults. And so you can still change those, you can still modify those, like I was saying. So really cool stuff with the extends. Replaces, we do have there is the idea of replacing a whole category of settings. So replacing all of the spacing, replacing all the border settings that are defaulted into Tailwind. Those feel very destructive, so we don't really use that. But we've left room in case we ever decide to go down that route for something. If there's a really good use case for it, we will evaluate that. The final thing here is just going to be utilities. So these are brand new utility classes that are created as part of Skeleton, and so these are things that don't necessarily exist. The concept doesn't exist in Tailwind that we're implementing or extending or adding to. And so this idea of color pairings that we talked about earlier, maybe not in this video, maybe in the last video, this idea where we have color pairings. So when you toggle between light and dark mode, what that's doing behind the scenes is it's grabbing your surface color on either end of the spectrum here, and it's creating a pairing between 50 and 950. So we're showing it with the primary tone here, but imagine it was this kind of grayscale version for the surface tone. That pairing is a custom class that's being created by our plugin behind the scenes that does this. And so you can see we're creating, it's a little bit, it looks a little bit like Greek here, but you can say, okay, we're adjusting background, primary, what's the light pairing color and what's the dark pairing color. And so we do both ways. We do 50 and 950, and then we do the other way around, 950 and 50. And so what that's actually doing is it's creating a class for you behind the scenes that's saying the property, background, the name of the property, background, surface, etc. And then what is the light tone, and then in the dark tone, what's the paired version when it switches to dark mode. So that's how dark, if you're ever curious about how color pairings are being generated and how those are kind of working. We visualized a little bit of this in V2 where we had design tokens, color pairings, that kind of pairing up between the values on either end of the luminosity or lighting or saturation or whatever you want to think of that. I think it's luminosity is technically the right term there. Presets. So this is the new things that are kind of being introduced. So we have this concept of variants in V2, which you've probably used for styling your buttons or cards or something like that. In Skeleton V3, we have the same thing. We're just calling them presets. It's a little bit shorter, a little more semantic to what their meaning is. It doesn't conflict with the same term that's used in Tailwind for a completely different concept. So Tailwind has the concept of variants, which is not at all what we're doing here. So in order to kind of prevent that naming conflict, we're going with a new name, and this is what we settled on. So works really well. It's much shorter, much easier to do. This is just used to construct that, and then likewise, our typography system, almost identical to what you would expect. We're just creating these little custom utility classes here that are then ingesting the styles that are being provided by the variables in your theme, right? The CSS custom variables. So this is just where we wire up and build all of that. So you can see we do that here, and then in our base styles, we're coming in here and consuming those created classes, those utility classes, to actually apply that to your body. So it's kind of a three-step process. One, the settings defined in your theme. Two, we create this utility utility classes that ingest that and create these class names. And three, we create this base classes that come in here and actually define those. So kind of a cool process. It's a little bit of a few things, concepts to wrap your head around and understand there, but it's really neat how it works behind the scenes. So that's pretty much the entirety of the Tailwind plugin as it exists today. Obviously, there's a lot there, and I've thrown a lot at you very quick and things like that. If you're really curious to learn more about how some of this stuff works, I do highly encourage you to come into the Tailwind documentation here and scroll down to, there's a section called plugins right here. And they have all of this documentation here that just covers all the details for, the specific technical details for how, some of the naming concepts and how these things are being adjusted and implemented and used, and what does some of the terminology mean. So I'm throwing base styles at you, I'm throwing variant terms, I'm throwing components. What does that mean? All of that is explained and described in this documentation. So if you really want a great deep dive into that, highly recommend you come and check that out. The last thing I wanted to show you is kind of a new idea or a new concept we're playing with Skeleton V3, which is this idea of a lot of the styles and things we're defining here, such as our presets, treating these more as proper primitives. And so when I say primitives, what I mean is these are your small building blocks. And by putting this together, you can create really interesting combinations that create something greater. In some cases, like obviously, we have styled buttons and badges. This is a combination of base button styles with a preset that's defining those color settings there, right? So using that concept, but going even a step further, which is very easily shown with our cards that are being displayed on here. So if I come and take a look at the documentation site, I open our style sheet, which is here. You can see these kind of describe, and I'm calling these local abstractions. I don't know the proper term. If you are familiar with the concept of atomic design, there's a really great article by somebody named Brad Frost, which we linked in the V2 docs. In fact, I think we have a quicker link here. Design tokens, this video right here. I highly recommend this if you're kind of interested in the more advanced kind of concepts and sort of power features that we're about to talk about here. But Brad Frost has a really cool concepts between design tokens, which is something we've used heavily in Skeleton, and atomic design, which, let me see if I can find the article. Brad Frost, yeah, there we go. And so he has this great visual that showcases what this is, right? So when I say atomic design, it's essentially you're building small pieces called atoms, and then you're putting those together to form molecules, which create organisms, which then are your templates for your site, and then your pages. And so it's a high level concept. It's not a specific like technical thing of like a feature that's built into CSS or something like that. But what we're thinking about here is this idea of how do we take these primitive classes, which would be like card, border styles, maybe some of the preset styles. How do we build and abstract these smaller, these small classes, utilizing those features in your style sheet for your application, and then create something bigger, a molecule, if you will, instead of an atom. And so what I'm playing with is this idea of creating styles that are very specific to how do I style my cards. Maybe having a handful of options for those cards. And so again, it's that sort of preset, or it's a set of classes that create something greater, right? And so instead of these just being the utility classes we're using over and over and over, and pairing those again over and over and over, we're abstracting that a little bit and creating these kind of larger structures. And the result is something that looks like this. And so if you look, we could easily create a class like this by using one of our card style. We could pair that with, let's even see what we're doing for this. So filled card, yeah, we're using the card, we're using a border, we're setting a certain pairing of surface tones, and we're setting a fill color for that. We're doing all of those things, whereas every single time that we created that card, we would maybe have to copy those across, right? We'd have to create a div, create a class, put all of those classes in there. The next class, the next card we create, we have to replicate all of that and do all of that again. And so there's this kind of idea that we can do where we abstract that, right? We create this set of classes that are just created into something smaller. And so if I actually look at the way the cards are kind of defined here, I'm not defining all those classes over and over and over. I'm just defining these little abstracted classes. And so what this does is it provides this ability to provide kind of more complex looking elements that are combining several of the Tailwind or Skeleton primitives to create something a little bit more polished, a little nicer, while still giving you full control of how all those pieces are constructed. So it's a little bit of a, more advanced concept, but it gets really interesting when you start thinking about the fact that in Skeleton, we have a way for you to target specific themes. So imagine a scenario where we had data theme equals skeleton. Maybe we're using the skeleton theme. Maybe we had our crimson theme was one that's, our wintry is another popular one. We have a couple different themes. You can target those with CSS using this. So imagine if we did something like this field class, but we did it for wintry, and then we did it again for skeleton. We could then now adjust these per theme. So when the skeleton theme is on, we use this class, which gives us all of these kind of canned styles, but we could tweak and adjust that from theme 1 to theme 2. So it's a little bit more of a power user feature here, a little bit forward thinking, a little bit of kind of things to figure out of how, maybe some conventions for how we want to name or do some of these things. But we're kind of going to leave those tools in your hands, give you the way to do that. We personally, on the skeleton side, are going to use this to kind of make it where when you flip between the different themes on our documentation site, so you had a little theme picker and you switch between, say, skeleton to wintry to modern, on and on, instead of just all of the primitives being swapped out here, we might have these abstracted classes. So when you're looking at something like the card styles, maybe that by default it would have that little kind of border style around the card, but when you go to wintry it doesn't, or it has a really thick, or maybe it has a shadow, maybe it has something else that's very unique, but it's theme specific. So I'm very excited about this concept, and I don't necessarily again have the terminology for it defined yet, But I really like this idea of being able to mix and match these primitives to build something more reusable and powerful that can even be adjusted per theme if you really wanted to. So definitely look forward to some of that in kind of future discussions. We'll probably create a whole tutorial or, kind of documentation section that talks through some of these concepts. But again, just some interesting stuff to kind of think about or look forward to. I know this video is getting a little long, so I'm going to kind of try to wrap up. There's a couple of things I just want to finish or kind of mention real quick. So if you are curious, you want to see this documentation site and see kind of the stuff that I'm looking at, you can see I'm obviously running a local instance of the documentation site from the Skeleton monorepo. We are looking to get a hosted domain for next.skeleton.com, or excuse me, .dev. So I don't even know the correct URL. Great that they have a little skeleton there. Obviously not loading yet. We're looking to that. We're getting that set up. We've just got to get some of our CI and CD processes set up for that. The next couple things we also are looking at as what comes next. So there's the documentation site that exists today. Going to be looking to do some overhauls and updates to that. The theme generator that I was talking about earlier. And then we begin porting over some of the components. So those are all the things that we can kind of start looking forward to over the next couple weeks. So I'm going to pause the video here, but definitely look out for those, in future update videos just like this. Thank you for your time, and hope you're enjoying the updates. Thanks, everybody.